Due to the state of emergency, all planning board members are participating remotely. I will now ask our planning director, Aaron King, to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're just going to go in alphabetical order. As I call your name, please respond. George Bryan.
Here.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Here.
Jason Grubbs.
Here.
Tommy Hicks.
Here.
Clarence Lamb.
Here.
Chris Leak.
Here.
Johnny Seegers.
Here.
Brenda Smith.
Here.
Jack Steelman.
Jack, you're on mute.
Here.
All right, all members are present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. King. So just a little instruction for today. When there is a vote, a roll call will be conducted. Each board member will be recognized and asked to clearly state their vote for the record. All guests participating in this remote meeting, either through Zoom or by phone, will remain muted until recognized by the board for comment. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the city's YouTube channel. It will also be replayed on TV 13 tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Our first order of business today will be the consent agenda. These are items for which the petitioner is requesting withdrawal or continuance, for which staff has recommended approval and no one has signed up to speak in opposition. For our public hearings today, each side will have a total of 12 minutes. There is no rebuttal period. Once you have been recognized by the board staff will unmute your microphone so that you can provide your comments. After the public hearing is closed and the board goes into work session, no one is permitted to speak unless the planning board asks them a question. The items under section B of our agenda will require further action by the elected body, either the city council or county commissioners. As such, votes taken today are recommendations which are considered by the city council or board of commissioners during this review of the request. For special use district zoning requests, the petitioner must identify the intended use or uses of the site and give specific details on how the site will be developed. If you are addressing the board today, as customary, we would ask that you before you begin your comments, please give us your name, address, and zip code for the record. The first item of business is the approval of the March 12th meeting notes. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, can I get a motion, please?
Move approval, Clarence.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second.
That was Mr. Who is that? Mr. Seegers?
Yep. Second.
All right, Mr. Second by Mr. Seegers. I'm going to call on. Is there needs to be a vote of all board members individually?
Yes. So Mr. Chair, I'll share the news. We're gonna each vote that we take today is gonna have to be by roll call, so it's gonna take a little longer. I'll call the vote for each one of these. So per state statutes, we're gonna have to do the roll call. So Mr. Chair, with a motion and second, if you're ready, I'll call the roll for the action on the minutes.
Please call the roll.
Okay. George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Johnny Seegers.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Motion
King.
passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. King. That was unanimous. Thank you, board. Now I'm going to call on Mr. Corley for our consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item on the consent agenda is item B1, case
Mr. Desmond, let me jump in. And Mr. Chair, I'll offer one suggestion if the board would entertain this. We still have 8 folks that Brian is trying to work through to get into the waiting room. And perhaps if the board was interested, we could start with C1, D1, and D2, which are non-public hearing items. So if the board is interested with that revision, we could do that, and that would allow Brian to allow folks into the meeting room for the public hearing items.
I'm sorry, sir. So you said that's C1, C2, and
C1, D1, and D2, those are non-public hearing items. And if the board is inclined, we can start with those and then we'll work our way back to the beginning of the consent agenda.
So I don't have an issue with that. Does that need to go through a motion and second and polling?
Unless there's objection from the board, I believe we can move on with that decision.
All right. Mr. Corley, if you could unshare your screen for a moment. And just make sure that there are no issues from any of the board members. Does any board member have an issue with moving to C, D1, and D2 while others are waiting to join?
No, sir.
All right. All right, so then Mr. Corley, we'll jump to special use permit starting at C.
All right, Mr. Chair, another member of staff is actually controlling the presentation. So when she's ready, I'll go ahead and start with C1. That is case W3443, which is a special use permit request for a parking reduction at the intersection of Weston Boulevard and Reynolds Road. Next slide, please. Here's a photo of the subject property. If anybody's familiar with this building, it's very visible if you're driving south on Reynolds Road towards town. Next slide, please. So this is the site plan that was submitted. It's basically an as-built survey because to the extent possible, the site plan does meet UDO requirements aside from the circumstances that require their petition for a special use permit. There are no issues. I'll just remind the board that this is a site plan review for a special use permit. The board is looking to make sure that the plan does or does not meet UDO requirements. And as I just mentioned, it does, other than the one aspect that necessitates this request, which is parking. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Could I ask a question, Chairman Lake?
Yes, Mr. Bryan.
Mr. Corley, there was retail in this space prior to this request, as well as office and retail. What kind of parking accommodations were there at that time?
When those uses existed, I may not have been here, but I presume that the existing parking situation is the one that existed at that time. The UDO requires, or the UDO does not require additional parking to be provided for those uses. The only use that is required to provide additional parking in older buildings that's constructed prior to, I think, 1988 in GMA 1 and 2 is restaurant. And so anything other than restaurant in an older commercial building does not have to provide additional parking.
Okay. Has the applicant made any attempts to accommodate customers through, for instance, valet or contracting with other nearby parking lots?
I am not aware of anything like that. They're not able to actually operate right now because they can't get a permit, or they can't get a use permit for zoning without the special use permit for the parking reduction. So I'm not aware of any intent to do anything like that.
Okay. You know, of course, that being a neighborhood I'm very much associated with, there's been a great deal of discussion, and the stated use is exciting, I think, for the neighborhood. The thing that I will put out there, because this will, I think, next go to City Council, is that there are neighbors such as the one that wrote in and commented on this case that are already squeezed by having no off-street parking and living in the area. And I hope that the City Council will be more than helpful in arranging permit parking for those neighbors along Pilot View and West End that are in that area that are having problems with this. I don't know what we can do in terms of forwarding that to the City Council.
So Mr. Chair, this is Aaron King. I'll jump in to kind of follow up on George's comments. George is 100% right. So the board has very limited authority today in what they are asked to do. This will go forward to City Council for a quasi judicial hearing for the issuance of the special use permit, and we'll examine the 4 findings. And folks either in support or opposition will be able to attend that meeting and give sworn testimony and talk about some of those things. And I fully expect there will be a robust discussion about parking needs. I know this is an area that is on the council members' radar, so I fully expect a pretty robust discussion of parking needs and issues in the area when this goes forward.
So if I understand correctly, thank you, Mr. King. So I guess the council members meeting is July the 6th, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so what we're voting on today or deciding today is, does it meet UDO requirements?
Correct. What you're asked to do today is, does the site plan meet UDO requirements? It's a very limited scope, and of course, City Council will have a much broader scope when this goes to them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Are there any other questions from any other planning board members? All right. So I guess now we're looking for a motion.
This is Clarence. I move that we find that it meets the requirements.
Thank you, Mr.
Recommend
Lamb. Is
approval.
there a second?
Johnny Seegers, second.
Thank you, Mr. Seegers. Second by Mr. Seegers. Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
Yes. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan, Melinda, are you muted? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
My answer is yes.
Okay. Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Seegers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. So we'll move, the next item will be D1.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, D1 is a planning board review for a 180 lot planned residential development, or PRD. It's on almost 46 acres on both sides of South Peace Haven Road, north of Wexham Road and south of Foxdale Drive. The next slide shows the preliminary subdivision plan. This is actually one of the PRDs that we hold up as a good example, utilizing the open space requirements that are under consideration by the City Council and the County Board of Commissioners right now. If you'll recall a discussion about a text amendment for PRD open space requirements, this is one that we use as a good example. So staff recommends approval of this request.
Move approval, like Clarence.
All right, that's motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second, Jack Steelman.
Second by Mr. Stillman. Thank you. Any discussion?
A question, George Bryan.
All right, Mr. Bryan.
Mr. Corley, is the reason this is such a good plan is because it has the open space in 2 different places in it that keeps it within a short distance from the units?
That's one of the reasons. Most of the biggest part, I suppose, is that it meets the requirements for 50 continuous feet of frontage. The majority of the open space is very visible and easily accessible. And it's not throwaway space, which we were getting, a lot before we proposed the changes to the standards.
Thank you.
What may I ask a question, Melinda Dunnigan?
Yes.
Mr. Corley. The greenway access, is that accessible from one of those recreation areas, the one on the east side?
The greenway easement should be accessible from common open space.
Okay, that was my question. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
There's a previous motion and second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Mr. King, could you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Segers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, board. The next item on the consent agenda is D2, which is another planning board review. It is also another plan residential development. This one is 53 lots on about 25.5 acres, the east side of the intersection of Caraca Road and Monarch Way. And the next slide shows the site plan, which also demonstrates compliance with the proposed open space requirements for active open space. Staff recommends approval of this request.
Move approval, Clarence.
Thank you. There's a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second by Tommy Hicks.
Second by Mr. Hicks. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Segers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. So now, Mr. Chair, we will make our way back to the beginning of the consent agenda.
So Mr. King, I know we were waiting on others. Do you have any update if they were able to come in?
If Brian Wilson can hear me, I don't think we have anybody else in the waiting room. Is that correct, Brian? I don't know if Brian heard me, but Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, I don't.
Aaron, I was gonna say, Aaron, from what I can tell, I don't see anyone waiting to get in.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Everybody, we've got 52 participants in the meeting, so I don't see anyone in the waiting room at the present time.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
So I'll let Desmond, we'll make our way back to the beginning of the consent agenda, and I believe our first item will probably be B1.
Mr. Chair, item B1 is case W3436. It's a request to rezone property from AG and RS20 to RS20S. It's on the north side of Patsy Drive, east of Glen Landing Drive. I just add that this property was recently annexed into the city limits. And before the coronavirus arrived, the board actually made a recommendation to convert the zoning to city zoning. The next couple of slides show you some photos of the subject property. This is the view from Patsy Drive. The subject property is in the background here. And then the next photo shows the subject property in the background again. This is from Glen Landing Drive. The next slide is the site plan. It is 36 lots in a proposed subdivision. This is also a PRD with the active open space meeting the standards under consideration. So the new standards that we're hoping will be adopted. The site plan shows a street connection with Glen Landing Drive. That's the primary access into the site. Staff recommends approval of this request. It's consistent with the surrounding neighborhoods. It has convenient access to public water and sewer, and it focuses development away from the sensitive environmental features in the northern and northwestern portions of the property. Again, staff recommends approval, and I'll remind you, Mr. Chair, that the board will need to make two motions, one for consistency and one for the zoning recommendation.
Thank you for that reminder. Mr. King, is there anyone here on this case?
Mr. Chair, I do not see anyone sign up in opposition. If Brian Wilson, can you hear me on this?
I can. Sorry, I've been still registering folks. We only have a proponent for this case. No opponent.
Okay, so we do not have any opponents in the meeting for this case, correct?
Correct.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. So seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed. Would someone like to make a motion, or is there any discussion?
And Mr. Chair, your first motion will be on consistency with comprehensive plan.
Right.
This is Clarence. I'd like to make two motions. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I'll second that, Jason Grubbs.
That's a motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Segers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay. So your next motion will be as far as whether to recommend approval or denial of the case itself.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I'd like to move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3436.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Jason Grubbs, second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
Yes, George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks. Tommy, are you still in there, Tommy?
I'm sorry, I had a little trouble unmuting for just a second, slip of the finger. That'd be a yes.
Okay. Clarence,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Segers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. And I would just mention all our guests in the meeting. Once your case has been acted on, you're certainly free to leave the meeting if you'd like, and you're certainly welcome to stay and stick around. It's up to you.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the consent agenda is B3, which is case W 3438's request to rezone from RS9 to RM12S. It's on the east side of Stafford Place Boulevard, south of Stafford Village Boulevard in the Petersburg Activity Center. This is a photo of the subject property from Stafford Place Boulevard. The subject property is to the left of this photo. You can see the entrance or the access point in the foreground of the photo. The next slide is the site plan or the proposed site plan for this rezoning request. There are three-story buildings, each with 24 units, a clubhouse, playground, and common recreation area in the northern portion of the site. The development is concentrated in the northern half of the site and outside of the restricted stream buffers to the east. The next slide shows you the submitted elevations for the request. And in summary, this request is consistent with the South Suburban Area Plan and Legacy. It's within walking distance of a shopping center and transit stops with existing sidewalks providing a pedestrian network. Staff recommends approval of this request, and I'll remind the board again that we need two motions, one for consistency and one for the zoning recommendation.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair, this is Aaron. I don't see, and I'll verify again with Brian, that we do not have any opposition here for case W 3437. Brian, can you confirm that?
3438.
I'm sorry.
3438.
Sorry, wrong number. Brian, can you confirm that we do not have opposition for case 3438?
There's no opposition for case 3438.
Thank you, Samuel.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thank you. So seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed on this, on 3438.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
That's motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second, Jason Grubbs.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Segers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
That passes unanimously. And now we'll do a motion on the actual case itself.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I'd like to move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3438.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second, Johnny Segers.
Second by Mr. Segers. Any discussion? Mr. King, would you please call the roll on case 3438?
Yes, George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Seegers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
That case passes, approval passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the consent agenda is B4, case W3439. It's a request to rezone a little more than 7 acres from IP to GBS. It's on the south side of Union Cross Road, west of Wahlberg Road, adjacent to Union Cross Park. This is a photo of the subject property looking in from Union Cross Road, and the next slide shows you a view looking west along Union Cross Road. The subject property is to the left of this photo. The next slide is the site plan, which proposes to retain the majority of the existing buildings which have historical value. They are proposing to add 4 additional buildings for housing or for resident housing, 1 additional building for support, and another building for staff housing. There is a proposed fence surrounding the subject property with secure access gates. The next slide shows proposed elevations for their new buildings. And staff recommends approval of this request. The site has historically been used in a similar way. There are no standalone commercial uses requested. The only use that they have requested is group care facility C, which requires GBS zoning. And the use or the request addresses a growing community need. Again, the board will need to make 2 motions, 1 for consistency and 1 for the zoning recommendation.
Are there any questions for staff? So, Mr. Corley, this is Trosa, correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
This is George Bryan. I have a question.
All right.
Is there anyone from Historic Resources present on the call?
No, they're not in the meeting today, no.
The one thing that is brought up in this case is the historical nature of it. And as far as that's concerned, I mean, knowing this site for many years, it isn't a major roadblock in it. There was the issue of one Quonset hut. Is that correct?
I believe the site plan shows demolition of a structure with that description. I'm not sure whether it was contributing to the possibility of a historic listing.
And George, this is Aaron. I'll also add, we do have a condition prior to grading permits. The developer shall document any structures on the site proposed for demolition in accordance with the standards from historic resource staff. So we do have a condition in there to try to mitigate that to the extent possible.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if historically ARCA, which I guess is the current owner or whatever, gained any federal dollars or state dollars from for that Quonset hut being on there and for keeping it in that in terms of tax breaks or whatever?
I wouldn't know that. We wouldn't have the answer to that one for you.
Why is that?
I can answer that. This is Daryl, work at ARCA. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
The county actually is the landlord of the property. Forsyth County. ARCA has been here since 1975, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So we have not benefited.
Thank you. That I had forgotten that historical fact that the county still maintain that. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for staff? Mr. King, is anyone here to speak on behalf of this case?
Mr. Chair, I do not see where we have any opponents signed up to speak for this case.
All right. Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I'd like to move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan 3439.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second, Jason Grubbs.
Seconded by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, would you please call the roll?
Yes. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Seegers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay. So now we'll take a motion on the case itself.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3439.
That's motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
This Mr. Bryan, a second.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Seconded by Mr. Bryan. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
Yes. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Seegers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right, it passes unanimously.
Hey, how are you?
Next item on the consent agenda is B5, which is case W3440. This is a site plan amendment at the northwest corner of Silas Creek Parkway and Sunny Knoll Court. This photo is the subject property from Sunny Knoll Court. And then the next photo is a view of the subject property looking north along Silas Creek Parkway. They have the iconic landscaping on the left side of the photo. The next slide is the site plan that shows the proposed amendment. This is for the addition of storage tanks for generator fuel and some additional security measures that would include retaining wall or other walls with security fencing on top. There's no proposed building expansion or parking expansion. None of the allowed uses are proposed to be changed. The biggest change here is to the landscaping along Silas Creek Parkway. The next slide shows some elevations that were submitted by the applicant, or at the top are actually some section views of their proposed development. You can see that they have the security walls and the fencing adjacent to the proposed structures that shelter the above ground storage tanks. The bottom diagram is the view that would be behind the landscape, I suppose, from Silas Creek Parkway. The next slide should show some special conditions that were proposed with this amendment, that there won't be any access granted along Silas Creek Parkway, and that there also be no signage allowed on Silas Creek Parkway. Staff sees this as consistent with the area plan. Again, there are no proposed use changes, no new access points are proposed, and the landscaping along the western boundary, which is where all the residential development is going to be undisturbed. All of the development is on the eastern side, close to Silas Creek Parkway. Staff recommends approval of this amendment. The board will once again need to make two motions, one for consistent with the comprehensive plan and the other for zoning recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Corley. Are there any questions for staff?
Yes, I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Ms. Dunnigan?
Yes. What will we, do you have a visualization of what we might see from the road? Will there be any kind of vegetation that will grow up to provide some screening to the structure that they're building?
Yes, so the site plan that's in the agenda book and that's available online has their proposed landscaping. We actually asked that they show on the site plan. They have proposed some evergreen plants that are going to grow up. It's not, what they have proposed is not going to look like what's there now. They just don't have the room to have that degree of screening, but they will have evergreen plantings in front of the wall and fence. And then they do have proposed some additional trees. I think that's on the northeastern corner of the property next to the sheets. And then they have some additional trees at the intersection with Sunny Knoll Court. All of that is on the site plan.
On page 4 of that item in your agenda book are 2 color renderings of what it would look like from Silas Creek Parkway.
Yeah, I saw those. I wanted to make sure that that was what that was. Okay, thank you.
This is Mr. Bryan. This may be a question for the applicant, but I noticed in the comments there was a requirement from the fire department for an above ground tank. Moving the tanks from below ground to above ground. What are the accommodations for potential spills into that waterway that is very close to there? And how does the applicant plan to take care of that? I know that there's generally a high level of security on these sites, so I'm just more or less worried about what happens if there's a misspill in filling or a leak or something like that.
I wouldn't be able to answer that question. It's my understanding, though, that these storage tanks are in addition to any tanks that exist on the site, and they wouldn't be replacing what's already there. But we may need to clarify with the applicant.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if you'd like, if the applicant could unmute and answer that question, if you would like.
I just
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Is the applicant here?
There are 4 proponents. I'm not sure who wants to speak, but
Okay.
I have unmuted 3 of them.
All right. So whichever one's going to speak first, if you could please give your name, address, and zip code for the record, please.
I'd like for Bart Sargent to please represent Wells Fargo.
Thank you.
You got it. Hi, this is Bart Sargent, Monroe, Georgia, 30655. I'm the architect for Wells Fargo for this project.
I'm sorry, if you could please give your zip code as well.
Sure, 30655.
Thank you.
The proposed above ground tanks will actually be phased in to replace the existing underground tanks due to some environmental concerns. Those existing tanks are now about 25 years old and have reached their lifespan. The proposed design includes curbing and capture basins in order to contain any leaks. The proposed tanks are double wall steel with an interstitial space that's monitored for leak detection. Being a critical facility here, that leak detection is required.
That certainly answers my question.
Thank you very kindly. Would any of the other opponents like to speak on behalf of this, or was that answer satisfactory to all of you?
That was satisfactory to me. Thank you. This is Amy Landon.
Thank you, Amy. All right, any further questions for staff? Mr. King, is there anyone here in opposition to this case?
Mr. Chairman, I do not have anybody signed up in opposition to this case.
All right, so seeing no one, then I declare the public hearing closed. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I'd move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
That's a motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second, Jason Grubbs.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Thank you, Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? If not, could you please call the roll, Mr. King?
Yes. George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Johnny Seegers.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right. And the next motion will be on the case recommendation itself.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence again. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3440.
That's a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second,
Mr. Bryan.
Second by Mr. Bryan. Thank you. Any discussion? Mr. King, would you please call the roll?
Yes. George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Segers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Unanimous recommendation for approval for case W 3440.
Mr. Chair, I believe we have people signed up to speak for the next item, so I would go ahead and skip to B7.
Right.
B7 is case W 3442. It's a request to rezone from RS9 to RM5S. It's on 7.5 acres on the west side of Everett Road, across from True Love Lane. The next slide is a photo of the subject property where you can see the street sign of True Love Lane in the photo, and the subject property is directly across from that. The next slide should show the site plan, which proposes 36-unit twin home community. It's internally focused. There are sidewalks on both sides of the internal public streets. They have their common recreation area in 2 different places. The next slide shows examples of building elevations, which we believe to be in keeping with the scope, or I'm sorry, the scale of the surrounding neighborhoods. So staff recommends approval of this request because the density is comparable to the surrounding neighborhoods. The same number of units would be allowed if they were detached as they're proposing here. The buffer yard that's shown in the site plan provides a physical and visible separation from the surrounding neighborhoods. The proposed scale, as I mentioned before, is compatible with the nearby homes. So we recommend approval of this request. Again, the board will need to make 2 motions, 1 for consistency and 1 for their zoning recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Corley. Are there any questions for staff? All right, Mr. King, is there anyone here in opposition to this case?
Mr. Chairman, no. We do have the applicant and the applicant's engineer, but we do not have anyone signed up in opposition.
Okay. Then seeing no one in opposition, I declare the public hearing
That's
closed.
incorrect. That's incorrect. We have one. Hello?
It looks like
Yes.
there's a Mr. Fred Marlowe. Mr. Marlowe, are you in opposition to the zoning case off of Everett Road?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Then Mr. Marlowe, we will, I'm gonna put you back on mute, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull this item and we'll come back to it. And we'll finish the rest of the consent agenda and come back to this item.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we'll move on to the next item. We'll come back to that one. We'll have a full public hearing on that case.
All right.
Next item on consent is B8, which is case F1594. So request to rezone from LBS to LOS. It's on the north side of Robin Hood Road, east of Meadowlark Drive, outside of the Robin Hood Village Shopping Center. This photo shows the subject property looking from Robin Hood Road, and the next photo is of the subject property from Vienna Lane. The next slide shows the proposed site plan. It's a proposed regulator station and the associated easements. So you see all of those lines across the page. The applicants have proposed an 8-foot wall and vegetative screening that surrounds the compound. And the portion of the property in the southeastern corner is proposed to remain undeveloped. It may be developed for a transitional land use in the future that will require a site plan amendment if that does happen. Staff recommends approval of this request. It serves a public need. There's no access proposed from Robin Hood Road, and there's a minimal traffic impact because this is a use that doesn't house people. And it allows for potential development in the unused portion, which would be in line with the area plan. Again, the board will need to make 2 motions here, 1 for consistency and 1 with the zoning recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Corley. Are there any questions for staff or Mr. Corley?
This is Mr. Bryan. Is there any, and again, this may be for the proponent, is there any danger in in expanding this natural gas or gas facility for residential areas around there? I know it's fairly close to the fire department, so that's nice. But is there any, I mean, what kind of issues are there around above ground gas facilities like that?
I'd probably want to defer to the applicant if they're wrong.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like for the applicant to respond, we have several folks from their team who have signed in to speak for this, and maybe if the most appropriate person to answer that question can unmute themselves and provide a response.
Thank you, Mr. King. If the representative would like to speak in case F1594, when you start, if you could give your name, your address, and your zip code for the record, please.
Good afternoon, Soretta Amos speaking from Smith Anderson. My address is 150 Fayetteville Street, Raleigh, North Carolina 27601.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. As it relates to the safety question, number one, this utility poses no risk. There is a similar utility station literally a mile down the road. There is no noxious or any sound issues as well. If you want more specifics, I will defer to Rick Douglas, who was also present at this meeting, who can provide more answers if that answer was not sufficient for Mr. Bryan.
Well, let me do follow up with a question. In your own protocols and safety expectations, are there distances which you put this from residential?
So on that question, I will defer to Piedmont Natural Gas, a representative, Rick, or Pinkney. I think one of you all would be more suited to answer that question. From my recollection, though, I do not believe that there is a specific distance requirement. Is Pinkney or Rick available? Unmute yourself.
Hey, this is Rick Douglas. I will defer to Pinkney Bynum with Piedmont Natural Gas. Are you available, Pinkney?
Yeah, I'll take it. This is Pinkney Bynum. I'm at 1412 East Barden Road in Charlotte, North Carolina, 28226.
Thank you, Mr. Bynum.
Yes. So I guess the question is about proximity. This facility is designed to change the transmission pressure to a lower pressure, and that's the function of this facility. So there's regulators involved that change from a higher pressure to a lower pressure. All that's above ground. If there are any, if there's a change in pressure suddenly, that might be a burst of the, it might be a brief expelling of the excess gas vented to the atmosphere. But that's normally, that's an abnormal operating condition. That's really how it's designed to ensure the safety. But as Soretta stated earlier, there is a similar facility just very close, within a mile, up Robin Hood Road, that serves the same function. We're not aware of any incidents at that facility or any other facilities of this type in Winston-Salem.
Thank you.
George, I've seen those. I've put them in before for years, and he's correct. There are not normally any issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seegers. Is there any other further questions for staff?
This is Jack. I just have one for Piedmont Natural Gas, please. I'm familiar with your other facility right down the street from this. How would you compare the exterior appearance from Robin Hood Road with this proposed facility to the existing facility?
They should look alike.
Okay, yeah, this is Pinckney Bottom. I'll answer that. So the other facility is kind of shielded, I think, by woods from the road, but it's only enclosed by a chain link fence. This facility, we've proposed a brick enclosure to match the adjacent brick at the fire department and the adjacent shopping center. So it's going to look completely different.
I sincerely appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Any further questions for staff? All right. Mr. King, is there anyone here?
Mr. Chairman, there's no one here signed up in opposition to this case.
All right, so seeing no one here in opposition, I'm going to declare the public hearing closed. What motion would the board like to recommend?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
That is motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second, Jason Grubbs.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
Yes, George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Seegers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay. And your next recommendation will be on the case itself.
Okay, this is Clarence again. Mr. Chairman, I move that the planning board recommend approval of F 1594.
Second.
Again, motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, would you please call the roll?
Yes, George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Tommy Hicks,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Seegers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
So it's a unanimous recommendation for approval for case F 1594.
Mr. Chairman, there are no more items on the consent agenda. The remaining public hearing items, which are B2, B6, and B7, were removed for various reasons. And so we'll start with B2, 34, 37, and I will hand it over to Gary Roberts for that staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. That show is being pulled up. Again, this zoning request is zoning docket W 3437. Petitioner is William Luther Dixon. It's 8.77 acres located on the east side of Old Salisbury Road and on the south side of J Avenue. The request is a special use rezoning from RS9 single family residential to RM12S residential building multifamily, and life care community are the two proposed uses. Life care community is a use which is for people that have either disabilities or are over the age of 55 that may live independently or within a facility that has medical services. Legacy's growth management plan, it's located in the south western portion of the city in the yellow suburban neighborhoods growth management area 3. It is not located along a growth corridor, which Peters Creek Parkway is. This is the zoning map showing the subject property. Again, it's 8.77 acres there just on the east side of Old Salisbury Road, south of Stafford Village Boulevard. The property is currently undeveloped. You can see the development patterns surrounding the subject property. There is some undeveloped property directly to the east and to the northeast, but it's also surrounded by single-family homes. There's about 5 single-family homes that separate this site from Old Salisbury Road. Homes along the Tortoise Lane and Stone Moss Lane to the south, and then further across Old Salisbury Road, you have single-family homes. Salem Terrace assisted living facility is located directly north. Aerial photographs showing the same development pattern. Again, the site is completely undeveloped. And a few images on site. This is looking north on Old Salisbury Road there at the intersection of Mid Pines. So the site is to the right, and that's approximately where the entrance would go into the site. They would have to provide a right taper and a left turn lane heading south into the entrance. This is looking south on Old Salisbury Road at the parking lot of Salem Terrace. You can see the yellow arrow that points to the intersection there of J Avenue and Salisbury Road. This is on J Avenue looking west towards Salisbury Road. The site's to the left. And this is across J Avenue. So this is a South Suburban Area Plan update. This was adopted by the City Council in 2017. Just walk you through the colors right quick so you can see the subject property there. Recommended no change. It remain low density residential, which is the yellow color. There was a concerted effort to really concentrate development within the activity center. This is a Peters Creek Parkway activity center there at the intersection of Stafford Village Boulevard and Peters Creek Parkway. So activity centers are a mixed use, compact, ideally walkable development where goods and services and living situations can take place there in a concentrated area, typically along major thoroughfares where transit is provided. There is a transit line, as you know, along Peters Creek Parkway, which is a growth corridor again. So the red would be commercial uses. The darker brown would be up to 18 units per acre and more. Blue would be institutional. And then the light brown is typically RM8 and townhouse type densities. So the site is near but not located within the activity center. This is a site plan showing the subject property there. To the top of the screen would be going west. You can see Old Salisbury Road there. The entrance loops around the facility. The parking and circulation is shown in gray. Then it comes back around and connects to J Avenue. The building is shown in brown there or orange. So it is a 3-story building, 84 units, and it's about 9.5 units per acre. So that's why they are requesting RM12S. That's the most appropriate district that meets that density. Stormwater facility located in the lower left there, close to in the lowest portion of the site near Tortoise Lane. So again, it's 84 units. It's one large building, and really, staff feels like the scale of this is not really compatible with the single-family homes, particularly to the south and to the west. To the east, at the lower portion of the site, there's a lot of undeveloped property, but really you're talking about wedging in a fairly large building, really out of scale with the single family homes around there from a height standpoint and a massing standpoint. But that is a site plan and it does meet UDO requirements. These are the elevations of the proposed building. In summary, again, the area plan recommends single-family residential for this site. And there are also alternative sites in the nearby activity center. As you saw from that image earlier, if you're familiar with the area, you know that there is quite a bit of development for multifamily, obviously a lot of retail, but there's several sites there that are recommended for this type of density very close by, which are again served by transit. Also, the 3-story building, as I mentioned, is out of scale with the nearby single-family homes, and the site lacks the characteristics typically recommended for higher density residential development. We encourage this type of development along growth corridors, which this is not, within an activity center, which this is not. And also, it's not served with transit, and it's not really in a walkable area, if you're familiar with this portion of Salisbury Road. So staff's recommendation is for denial. And again, the site plan does meet UDO requirements, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Roberts. Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I have a question for Mr. Roberts.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Roberts, remind me again, how is the adjacent institutional use used? How is it used again? What is that?
It's an assisted living facility, Salem.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And do you have any idea what the resident count is, or what the number of units are there?
No, I don't. I will say that
Okay.
it's a one-story building. I don't know the count.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
Let me ask Mr. Roberts a question if I can. Mr. Roberts, now this was originally aimed at single family. I know we had another case today where we said, okay, how about multifamily next to instead of single family? Would multifamily work in here, or some other higher density? Is it the 3 stories right adjacent to the buildings? Is that the major feeling of staff?
Well, that's certainly one of them. Again, there was a lot of effort put into that area plan that recommended concentrating the multifamily closer to the major thoroughfares where there's transit available and other services that people can walk to. This is not in a walkable area. It's surrounded by single family homes. And again, transit is not available. So it's very close, but there's no direct connection to Stafford Village Boulevard and no sidewalk linkage. And again, the building is out of scale with the surrounding homes. So
I'll jump in to amplify a little bit of what Gary said. George, yeah, a lot of effort went into this activity center. It began back around 2005, and we had that original Walmart rezoning case, and Lowe's were both coming towards the Peters Creek end of this, and that was before Stafford Village Boulevard was built. And as Gary mentioned, the idea was to cluster the more intense uses at Peters Creek and then taper back into the single family area with multifamily uses that were supportive. And while this parcel looks close on a map, in reality, as Gary mentioned, the lack of sidewalks, transit, other connecting features do, from a practical sense, make it feel further away. And I believe those are some of staff's reservations.
Thank you. I mean, I've gone to the site, and it is a residential area.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff?
Yes, I had a question.
Ms. Dunnigan.
Yeah, and I guess I'm asking this of Mr. Roberts or Mr. King, whoever one. It really has to do with the area plan. There is a recommendation on the parcel directly to the east that be low density single family. Should this proposal get approved, can you see an impact on how that vacant piece would be used? My concern is that might also open the door for that piece to be requesting multifamily, since it would be hard to do single family sandwiched in between 2 multifamily developments.
Certainly. May I ask Amy to back up to the area plan image? Yes, thank you. Okay, so are you referring to that large kind of rectangular area, Ms. Dunnigan?
Right, where J Avenue dead ends.
Well, certainly it would have some sort of impact on that. We can't predict what somebody may bring in. That site is surrounded by higher density residential as far as a recommendation standpoint, but it's not really annexed, or excuse me, accessed from those properties which have a direct connection to Stafford Village Boulevard. That property is annexed by J and also that street to the south within that development. So although it's undeveloped, staff feels like it would definitely have an impact on that. And again, you can see how much darker brown there is in the activity center where higher density development is recommended.
Thank you.
And Melinda, this is Aaron. I'll just add, it's kind of hard if you can see the area plan that's pulled up on your screen. And if you look really, really close, you can see that portion of J Avenue that actually extends into the property you were asking about. It's got some X's on there. So it's just a paper right away. There's no asphalt that gets you into that section. So you'd be looking at getting connectivity from J would mean that somebody would have to build that public road in that right of way, which would be costly to say the least. So that'd be another consideration.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions for staff? Thank you. All right. Mr. King, is anyone present to speak on behalf of this case?
Mr. Chairman, we have two folks speaking in support of it. The first person that signed up is Brian Murr. Brian Murr, if you're still with us, if you would unmute yourself and begin by giving us your name and address.
Yes, this is Brian Murr. The address is 2110 Ben Craig Drive, and that's Charlotte, North Carolina, 28262. I'm here in favor of this project, and Dennis Tharrington is, I think, has a little something prepared that he would like to say. Dennis, are you there?
Mr. Tharrington, you need to unmute. Thank you.
I did. I did bring a.
I'm sorry. Excuse me, if you could give your name and address and zip code record.
Right. My name is Dennis Tharrington. I live at 112 Westlake Drive, Henderson, North Carolina, 27536.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And let me begin by saying that I certainly have a lot of respect for what you guys do and for the planning procedure and dealing with all of the various requests and whatnot, particularly at this particular point in time. But even were we not in this situation, I do have a lot of respect for what you're doing. This particular project is one very similar to a number of other projects that my firm has developed in North Carolina. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that I wanted to show you. Someone out there has it. I'm not sure.
Mr. Chair, I believe Amy is pulling that up for Mr. Tharrington. Can everybody see that PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, do I control it or does she control it?
Amy is going to control it. If you can just give her the go next slide, and she'll advance it.
Okay. Let's next slide. Amy. Can you hear me?
Mr. Chair, let me pause for 1 second, make sure we're good on that. I'll be
all right. It's our first technical difficulty, so we're good.
That's all right.
Very good.
Can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I apologize. I have a laptop with a big screen, so I'm looking like I'm looking away from you, but I'm just looking at the screen. And so, but my camera's on the laptop. What I wanted to illustrate to you was, and I understand there's been a lot of discussion about the height of the building and walkability and how it's going to affect the neighbors and so forth. But I will say that we had a neighborhood meeting and we invited all of the folks within a certain distance, that whatever the requirement was, to come. And we had a few people show up. And I will say that after looking at our proposal, none of the people there were in opposition. And in fact, they all signed, the ones that were there signed paperwork that said that they would be in favor of this. They thought it would help their neighborhood. And in fact, if you, on the streets that we can't see on this next slide or two, but there's a street, I'm going to say it's below this property, that is, I think it's Tortoise Lane or something like that. One of the residents there gave us a right of way to go through that his property for us to be able to access sewer. And so the residents themselves don't really have in that surrounding area have been pretty welcoming towards this project, I believe. And as I said, it's similar to a number of other projects that we've done, in that there's been a lot said about walkability on this, around this site. Every one that we've done in Henderson and Oxford and Gastonia, they are on sort of streets that are more or less major thoroughfares. There are no sidewalks. There's sidewalks within the facility, but they're not sidewalks going out of the facility. And that actually is something that our particular client likes. Our clients are primarily, well, the average person that lives in one of these is about a 73-year-old widow. And quite frankly, she's not going to get on the sidewalk, doesn't want to get on the sidewalk and go down through some crowded area, a walkability area to get her groceries and then walk them back home. That's not who's going to live in this facility. This facility is going to be mainly occupied by people, like I said, 70-year-old widows. In fact, particularly in the environment that we're in right now, they don't want to go out and mingle in crowds. So where you would want to put this type of facility, while it might seem like it would be a great fit, and it probably would be a great fit for ordinary multifamily, it's not a real good fit for the type of clientele that would live in this. They actually form sort of communities within the building. They look after each other. They don't really want a lot of people around them in the sense that just general population. Also, in terms of, there has been comments made about the height of the building. We put additional space, and Brian could, I believe, confirm this. We have additional space around the building that we plan to have additional trees planted and landscaped area so that the building would sort of be hidden from view to a certain extent.
So Mr. Tharrington, it looks like the slide presentation is working. Is there a particular slide you would like her to go to?
Well, you probably can't see my cursor moving around on this, right?
No, sir.
She just goes through that. That's Salem Terrace Assisted Living, which is across the street. And I think it's sort of a compatible use. It's in a transitional area. The next slide. This is a rendition that we had ordered of the building that we had ordered, and we had this at our public hearing. I will say that we probably will reduce the number of units in the building from 84 to 72 units, which would reduce which would lower our density, but the building would still be the 3-story building, the style that you see here. Next slide. And well, you've already seen this. This is the site plan. The next slide. This is a building that I built in Henderson, and this is a finished building. Now it is a 2-story building, but it still has the same general look. And you can see some sidewalks in the building, on this particular, in the parking lot, but those sidewalks don't continue out beyond into another area. Next slide. This is Garden Park Villas in Oxford, and that's their loop road. There's a lot of traffic on that road, and you see a sidewalk that goes out to that road, but it doesn't continue beyond that. There are sidewalks in and around the building that people do use, but they don't use them to leave. To just walk out to go get something. Next slide. This is the villas at Union Trace in Gastonia. This is on Union Road in Gastonia. It's the same. There are no sidewalks on Union Road. The next slide. Well, the request was for RM12S with a limit of 1 building, 84 units. Let's see what's on this next one. I can't remember. Next slide, yeah. So it would be 10.4 units per acre, and we're willing to drop it to 72, which would be 8.57 units per acre. I'm not sure where that fits into your proposal. Next slide. As I said, we sent a letter to all the neighbors within 500 feet, included my personal phone number. Nobody called me. Email, nobody wrote. We had about 5 neighbors, and they were neighbors that were very close around the project there, that this would have been in their backyard, so to speak, and they were not opposed. In fact, they were in support. Next slide. Oh yes, it was part of the seller's home place. They live in Apex, and of course they just won't sell the land, but they think that senior living is a valid use in this particular area. They grew up there, and they think that it would fit. That may be the last one. I'm not sure. Okay. These are just things that I'm hoping you will consider. It does abut the Peter Creek Activity Center, which is, there's a little pattern in between it, or a little parcel in between that, but it is close to that activity center. And I think this could be a transitional area between the assisted living and that area. I think it's sort of consistent with sort of a natural growth pattern that happens in this area. And quite frankly, it meets a huge need. There's a huge need for affordable housing. And this would be a great project. Next slide. Well, I don't want to just bore you to death with all this, but like I said, that, walkability is not, it's really not something that the people that live there are really going to want to do. But it is a compatible use from a practical standpoint, in that it's across the street from the assisted living. It doesn't negatively impact the surrounding neighbors or neighborhood. It would have, it's very low traffic. Nowadays, grocery stores and pharmacies and whatnot deliver to places, not to mention Amazon and other stores. And elderly people are less like, I'm one of them, I'm less likely to go out and want to be in crowds. I don't want to be in a crowd. At any rate, that's pretty much our presentation. And but I do think it would be a strong addition to the affordable housing choices in the city. I think it would be well received, and it would be very attractive and well managed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Murphy, how much time is left?
There we go. 2 minutes.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak in support of this? Mr. King, is there anyone here to speak on the other side?
Mr. Chair, we do not have anybody in the meeting signed up to speak against this case.
Okay. Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed. Planning board, anyone like to make a motion or any further discussion?
This is Clarence. I'd like to make a couple of comments. I guess they're actually questions, and I think Mr. Roberts, is that who presented this, or Mr. Corley? I can't remember now.
Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Roberts. All right. The parcel, if I'm looking at it correctly, the parcel due north is institutional, but I guess all the brown is about what, 8 or 9 units. That's about 8 to 18 units is what that density is, right? Multifamily. Isn't that what brown allows? Intermediate density.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, 8 to 18 units. All right. And one of the challenges that the reason that I guess I'm looking at it so closely is that the parcel to the east that Ms. Dunnigan was talking about, I just wonder what the feasibility of getting a road in there and doing a traditional subdivision. Plus, that traditional subdivision is going to be backed directly up to Brown, which will be up to 18 units per acre. And it just looks like, we try and design these activity centers to where you got your commercial in the center, surrounded by high density multifamily. Then we go down to sort of moderate density multifamily, and then down to the single family. And the parcel the parcel we're talking about, case 3437, and the parcel immediately to the east just look like that'd be your perfect stepping stone. That take you from the 8 to 18 unit density down to, I think Mr. Tharrington said he got his density down to about 8 or 9 units per acre, I believe is what he said, if I'm correct about that. It just, seems like that's the way we try and design these things. Seems like, just a comment.
From a staff perspective, I would agree with you in looking at it on paper. If you actually look at it in the field, there is a genuine disconnect between this area and the area to the north and the east due to topography.
This is a cut. This is like a cut side, and it looks like there's 20. Is there 20 feet of difference? Looks like
it drops significantly as you go to the east and then rises back up after you go through those streams. So the area that's currently shown in brown is all served on the other side of the creek area and is accessed via Stafford Village Boulevard, where this area, even though adjacent, is all single family and goes back towards old Salisbury Road. So again, from a feathering down standpoint, I agree with you on paper. It's just whenever you're out there from a staff perspective, functionally, it doesn't function that way. So that's one of the reasons for the recommendation in the area plan and the reason for our recommendation for denial, consistent with the area plan, but also again, just looking at how those pieces of the puzzle kind of fit in on the ground. They don't really fit together well from our perspective.
Yeah. And one of your all's, I think, one of staff's major objections was scale, height of the buildings. And these, I guess, are probably, what have we got, 45 feet from floor to top of that, 3 stories, something like that.
Probably. I was going to say, if you go to the peak of the roof, it's probably closer to 60. But
okay, all right. But and then on 3 sides of it, the surrounding topography looks like, and I may be wrong, but I'm counting the lines. It looks like it's about 20 feet higher. So this will, that would take the rooftops down 20 feet in comparison to the adjacent parcels, I guess is what I'm saying. I may be overstating that topo difference, but it looks like there's that many lines.
Clarence, this is Aaron. I'll add something kind of to your original comment about sort of the, how that parcel beside this site relates. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. I'm going to try not to break the entire meeting by doing this, so bear with me. Okay, can you guys see that geodata screen in front of you?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So this is our site that we're obviously talking about right now, and I think this parcel and this parcel are kind of the two sort of parcels in question. I think as staff looked at it, we felt like, sort of the future of these two parcels really kind of orients more towards the south, because even though on the map, yes, you've got high density residential that's right here and right here, functionally, when this piece of property gets developed, there's not a good chance that somebody's going to cross this stream, if you can see my mouse. So you've kind of got a natural buffer built in, and really the same on this northern piece. The likelihood of somebody kind of coming in and developing past that creek is probably pretty small. So, you kind of have this piece and this piece, which really orient more towards this single family neighborhood to the south. And I think that's why staff kind of felt like that piece does have more of a single family flavor than a multifamily flavor, even though on the map and the land use map, it certainly is right next door to the brown high density multifamily. So I just wanted to share that with the board as part of that discussion.
Clarence, this is Kirk. Just to add further on what Aaron was saying, when the staff was preparing this recommendation, again, we thought the single family would access from the existing stub. And also, as Aaron or someone was mentioning earlier, that paper right of way right now, we weren't even expecting that would probably even be open. So it would kind of be an extension of that existing single family subdivision. And if this piece were combined with it, then you could connect through that subdivision to the existing street that's already in place. So that's kind of what the staff envisioned.
On the southern boundary of the blue institutional use lot, we have a dedicated public right of way that would meet current street standards. Got 30-foot easement. I mean, that was put in place, right?
It's an old, you're talking about J Avenue?
Yeah.
J Avenue is an old, it wouldn't meet today's modern 2020 public street standards. It's an old right of way that's been on the record for some time.
Okay. I just, without any neighborhood opposition, and like you say, looking at the colors, red to brown to orange to yellow is sort of how I look at these things, in concentric circles around them. Especially, I don't know if you can get 30 lots out of that little chunk to the east, conventional subdivision. I guess you can. I'm not sure. You probably lose 20% of it with that creek. I don't know if you can get that many lots right. No neighborhood opposition. I understand that we like walkability, we like pedestrian friendly properties, but I don't know. That's,
George, there was an email of opposition from the group that was very involved with the South, with that plan.
Okay. And
so they did state their opposition based on their involvement with that plan.
Okay, but they evidently didn't come to the neighborhood meeting, nor did they come today or participate today. Is that right?
Well, and Lord help any of us going to those meetings during this period.
Oh, yeah,
because,
for sure.
I mean,
yep.
I can't even figure when we're going to have these cases, much
Yeah.
like the meetings were and when the notice was first put up.
Right, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know whether the developer has any potential to drop the scale a little bit or something. It looks like he has in some other places along the way with that and dealt with that some. But I mean, from being there and just looking at it from those houses that are there, that's quite a jump up. I wish it would be more transitional, and I certainly see where the staff's coming from in that. So I don't know whether it's appropriate to make a motion or not, Chris.
Well, I've got a couple of questions before we do that, if you don't mind.
Yes.
And one is for the petitioner. Clarence brought up the idea of what the topographic scale is going to be, I guess to the west. Can the petitioner answer that? Because it's hard to look at the topographic lines on the map plus what the infill may be once the product is built. So is there going to be a topographic, can he answer that question about if it's going to be lower compared to the adjacent property, or will it be sitting on the same level and then the 3 stories above that?
I think if Brian Murr is still here, I don't see him.
Yes, Dennis, I'm with you here.
Okay, can you answer that, Brian?
Yes, there is a significant drop in the topography across the site. Along J Avenue, you're sitting at about 840, and across the site, it is more than 20. You drop almost down to 800. So there is a significant drop along this site.
The finished floor elevation for the structure is 818.
Correct.
818 versus 840. That's finished floor, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so your total building height there would be, I think, about 40 to 45 feet, roughly, including the roof.
Right. So it really wouldn't be 60 feet above.
No, it would be 45 minus 20.
Right. And also, I can't guarantee this. I would have to go back, but one of the people that was at that neighborhood meeting, I believe, owns this. He owns a significant amount of property on J Avenue, Whether or not he owns the larger tract that you're talking about, I'm not sure. But after seeing everything, he was not opposed to it. And he owned a good bit of that property around the end of J Avenue.
Brenda, this is Aaron. I'll share my screen here again with you, maybe in hopes of kind of shedding some light on your question. If everybody can see, can everybody see that site plan there?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of, I'll back out and get everybody oriented. So this is the site plan. And we'll just kind of look here at that southern edge. We'll zoom in there really quickly. You can see the existing topo is labeled at 792 here, kind of coming down the hill in this corner. And as was mentioned earlier, kind of coming back up the hill to a finished floor elevation of 818 plus. So you're starting at 818 and add the 40-ish, or however tall the building's going to be on top of that. That's kind of the extent of what you can envision if this were approved and built.
Aaron, can you put that back up? I didn't quite catch what the elevation is on the adjacent property coming in.
Yep, bear with me. Let me get it pulled right back.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
It wasn't 792, I don't think.
So Brenda, which edge were you looking at?
Well, I'm looking at where it's going. I guess it's the western property line, the one towards Old Salisbury Road.
Okay.
There you go. Where the yeah, you're heading up there.
Yep, I'm trying to find the existing contour labels there. I see an 830 here. Brenda, can you see my mouse? 830 here, 828 here. That gives you a little idea of existing topography along that western property line.
Okay.
As compared to a first floor grade of, what did we say, 818? Thank you.
So there's a lot of discussion on this. Any further discussion, or would anyone like to entertain a motion?
I would like to ask one question of a non-physical nature. And that is, this is being proposed as affordable housing. Could you please say more about affordability in what context, please?
Okay. This property would be developed, as you said, as affordable housing, which the average person that lived in this apartment, the average, they have to qualify to live there. And the qualification is based around income. And nowadays, the income can stretch anywhere from about 30% of the median income in an area on up to 80% of the median income.
Right.
It has to average 60%. So if you average everybody in there, it's going to average about 60% of the median income. And so in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, that is, there's a huge need for properties that can satisfy that requirement. And of course, in this particular case, as I said, most of the people, this is a senior facility, and most of the people that live there are going to be, well, the average person's, and all the other properties I have, the average person is about a 73-year-old retired widow, and her source of income is Social Security. And that's, they can live in this property comfortably on that sort of income.
That's hard to achieve. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And I should say that the rents, of course, are affordable for people in that. So the rents are much less than market rate rents.
Right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Dunnigan.
If we're done with comments, questions, I'd have a few comments.
All right. Let me make sure. Are there any other questions? All right. Ms. Dunnigan, your comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I had some serious concerns about this proposal from a number of reasons. The incompatibility of this multifamily wedged up against on the back sides of the single family, I think is very concerning. It's not just a matter of absolutes in terms of elevation, but it's a matter of incompatibility in terms of there'll be a big parking lot right back behind these single family homes. Also, the fact that I see this as setting a really bad precedent should this be approved by the board, because it really doesn't respect the area plan and all the work that went into that. And the third reason really is the impact on that piece to the east. And just as was mentioned by one of the planning staff members, that there's that stub street to the south coming from that neighborhood. And I see that multifamily here would put pressure for another multifamily development that could only be accessed practically through a single family neighborhood. So for all these reasons, I just think that there are really problematic aspects, and I don't support this petition.
Thank you, Ms. Dunnigan. So with that, would you want to put that to a motion to support the staff's denial at this point?
And Mr. Chair, I'll remind the board, we need a motion on consistency and we'll need a motion on the case recommendation itself.
Understood.
Right, and consistency, I think it's very clear from staff's presentation that this is not consistent with the comprehensive plan, and I would make that motion in this case.
All right, so there's a motion on the floor that in this case that it is not consistent. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Bryan.
All right, second by Mr. Bryan. Any further discussion on the consistency piece?
And just to make clear that this, if you vote yes, you agree with the motion that it is inconsistent.
Correct.
It doesn't impact your decision about whether you recommend approval or denial. Or
Correct.
it could, but right.
All right. All right, so the motion and second is on the floor. Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Johnny Seegers.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And is there a motion for the second portion? Ms. Dunnigan, would you like to continue?
Yes, I would like to make a motion that W3437, I'm not sure exactly how the motion should be phrased, but I'd like to make a motion for denial.
It's been motioned by Ms. Dunnigan. Is there a second?
Mr. Bryan, second.
Second by Mr. Bryan. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
No.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
No.
Chris Leak.
No.
Johnny Seegers.
No.
Brenda Smith.
No.
Jack Steelman.
No.
Okay, it looks like that motion did not carry.
Okay, and this is Clarence. I'd move that the planning board recommend approval of W3437.
Second, Jason Groves.
It's been motioned by Mr. Lamb and seconded by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
Yes, George Bryan.
No.
Melinda Dunnigan.
No.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Seegers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay, the motion to recommend approval of case 3437 does pass. We'll move on to the next item. And Mr. Chair, as I think our staff is getting this ready, Amy is getting it pulled up. This will be item B6, and it's case 3441. And I believe Dakota Pale Short is going to make this presentation for our staff. Dakota, are you out there and can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So as was said, this is case 3441. My name's Dakota. This is a 4-acre site on the west side of North Trade between West 8th Street and West 10th Street. Currently, it is zoned light industrial, and it has been requested to be zoned pedestrian business limited. Next slide, please. So the site is currently in growth management area 2, urban neighborhoods, but is just adjacent to the south to the city center, GMA 1. It is not currently on a growth corridor. Next slide, please. So this is the site in yellow. To the west of it, we have existing pedestrian business, which is currently condominiums. To the north, we have light industrial, being a church and a city property for our buses. To the east, we have existing entertainment district, Entertainment Limited, which houses Earl and the Axe Throwing Club, and south of that, Wiseman Brewing Company. Directly south of the site is more light industrial. Next slide, please. As I said, aerial view of the site. It is currently used by a produce company for shipping and supplying produce to the area. Next slide, please. This is an image of the site from the east of the property looking across. You can see the brick condominiums in the back and the site itself with these aging metal roofs and currently parking for the shipping company. Next slide. This is looking south down North Trade, and as you can see, there's currently sidewalk, and it is currently a little dilapidated. Next slide. This is the north of the site. You can see the condominium center screen there. It is currently used as parking for the existing company. Next slide. This is Oak Street looking north again. You can see the condominiums on the left here and the property on the right. Next slide.
Lost his audio.
Yeah, we can't hear Dakota.
Sorry. I have a space to click and I accidentally took my hand off. Apologies about that. So the site is currently zoned light industrial in the area plan. However, it is in a special use condition area, which actually does support mixed uses. It suggests that we be very lenient with how the area is transitioning into the future. They very much see it as a area that could go almost any direction. There's a lot of potential in this site for growth. And so we, next slide. So we do find it consistent with the North Central Area Plan. It would definitely support new investment in the currently underutilized sites. And the pedestrian district would support the adjacent multifamily residential and also work with the adjacent entertainment district. Next slide. So we support approval for this redistricting, or sorry, rezoning. Any questions?
Yes, Mr. Lake, question for Dakota. Entertainment zone is relatively new. What is staff feeling about the different types of uses of budding with entertainment and how that will work out in the future? I mean, entertainment was designed so that we wouldn't have conflicts and sort of warn people that this is going to be out there, and you're going to have noise and you're going to have people 2 o'clock at night and things like that. We've got a school that's looking at this on the north side there in the future. I mean, what in general, what are we thinking?
So I will probably defer to Aaron for exactly what the intentions of an e-district are. But as far as pedestrian business, I do think that would function as a buffer for the e-district. It is supposed to produce a walkable area, which seems compliant with having a school, whereas the current light industrial does not fit a school or really condominiums adjacent to it. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah. So, George, this is Aaron. I'll chime in. And first, kudos to Dakota. This is his first zoning case. So good job and kind of working through this and helping us out in the zoning world. So, George, we had a lot of debate about this, about whether PB zoning or E zoning. And I think at the end of the day, we are comfortable with the PBL zoning because a lot of the uses requested are similar to those that are allowed in the E district. If you kind of pull that EL zoning case and what's allowed in the E district, it's very mixed use oriented, and a lot of the uses and what's intended here is along that same vein. So we are certainly comfortable with the PBL zoning for this location. It fits with the surrounding zoning. And it's certainly in line with the type of development that has taken place in this area of town over the years. And it certainly, we feel like, meets the special land use consideration that's called for this site. So in general, we feel those two districts are very similar. And in fact, I'll just take you way, way back when we were talking about the entertainment zoning district back around 2011 or 12. Staff was of the opinion you should just use the PB district because that does a lot of what the E district was trying to achieve anyway. So we feel those districts are very close, and so that's why we're supportive of the PBL request here.
I think what brought it to my attention was Stemmel's letter to the area talked about residential, multifamily, or whatever, and I was just wondering what we were thinking. I mean, it obviously works downtown, where we have a number of venues, a number of bars that operate until late at night with residential right there. So it almost doesn't make sense not to call it downtown in a sense, if we're going to mix it like that, as long as people's expectations meet that and understand that.
Fair enough. And I think we do have, and at some point when we're ready and we open up the public hearing, I think we do have Luke Dickey from Stemmel Associates on the line. And I think we also have 2 folks signed up that perhaps live in the area that may present some questions. So
thank you.
All right. Are there any? I'm sorry, I had a little technical difficulty. I had to log back in, so my apologies. I don't know what I missed, but are there any other questions for staff?
I would like to ask one, please.
All right, Mr. Stillman.
Convenient. I I'm highly appreciative of downtown walkability and connectivity, and and as a condition of the staff's recommendation for the developer to construct new sidewalks where there are none, I would equally recommend that the city do its part as well and replace the dilapidated public sidewalks that exist currently, so that we have a cohesively finished project at the end of the day.
So noted. All right. So seeing no one else, Aaron, Mr. King, is there anyone here in opposition? I think there was.
So Mr. Chair, we'll start with the proponents, and we have two folks that have signed up as proponents. The first one is Luke Dickey. So Luke, if you are here, if you want to unmute yourself and give your name and address to the board, and if you've got any material, we can pull that up for you.
Yes, I do have some presentation. I'll let Amy pull that up. Good evening now. It's Luke Dickey with Stimmel Associates, 601 North Trade Street, 27101 at Suite 200. And so as Dakota did, great job on your first presentation. It's nice to meet you virtually, at least we can say. So look forward to working with you on future projects as well.
Luke, bear with us. We'll get that pulled up for you and
Yep.
we'll get you going here.
No
bear
problem.
with us for 1 second.
And if needed, I do have it available on my screen to share as well. Okay, very good. Amy, go ahead and go to the next slide for me, please. So again, this is the site location bounded on the north side by 10th Street, Trade Street's to the east, and Oak Street is to the west. And the bottom side is by the Combs Wholesale Produce Company there. So again, it is roughly four acres. Next slide. So as mentioned in North Central Area Plan, this is located, it's in that North Trade Street potential mixed use area. So it's going to support a variety of uses called out in this area from also from LI zoning, but also residential or a mixture of residential, commercial, and office uses. This site is being looked at by DPJ Residential as a developer. You're familiar with the West End Station. Also just did the Easley Apartments. So this is his third development that he's looking at in the community. So that was mentioned in the neighborhood letter that went out for some market rate apartments. It was roughly approximately 244 units as plans are still being developed for that. Overall, he's looking at about a $45 million investment in this area and is also in an opportunity zone. So he's really looking at this as a kind of a transition zone as it moves forward in the future, of course, with the Ramcat there, Wiseman with Earls. I just think it's a great, vibrant area to kind of be located as the next up and coming location in Winston-Salem and its proximity to downtown. With that said, Mr. Bryan, you had mentioned kind of questions about the zoning. We looked at both the E district and the PP district. We discussed that with staff. Felt then that it was better to go more towards with the PB kind of as a transitional zoning at this point. At one time, I think the New Bethel Baptist Church had roughly concerns about when the E limited across the way was rezoned, that E district would continue on. So we felt this was a good buffer then, kind of roughly between that zoning and making the transition back towards 8th Street in that location. So very similar uses, but that's the reason why we chose to go with the PB zoning district for that as a transition. Plus, the adjacency to the existing condominium building was also PB, so it kind of coalesces with that as it transfers across the site there. Next slide, please. As always, we do best we can with neighborhood outreach. It's definitely different now with the COVID-19. So we sent out approximately 76 invites or letters, notifications to the property owners around. So outlined in red is everyone who we had sent some invites and letters to. I had 2 property owners responded and at the point were supportive of the rezoning. One was in the condominiums on the Oak Street, and then also another was had a use just off of University Parkway, had some property down there, and just had some general questions in regards to it. So at this point, we had no known opponents to the proposed rezoning. Next slide, please. So kind of reasons to approve. We worked with planning staff, of course, on the uses, and staff is supportive of this rezoning. It provides for a mixed-use opportunity in a redeveloping area of downtown that is transitioning from former industrial uses. We're consistent with the North Central Winston-Salem area plan, and as of the meeting, we had no known opposition to the request. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Thank you thank you.
Thank you.
And
Chairman, there are 8.5 minutes left.
Thank you. Mr. King, there was someone else you said there were two.
Mr. Chairman, it looks like there's a John Kleindens that is signed up to speak in support of this request. Mr. Kleindens, if you're on the line, if you want to unmute yourself and give your name and address for the record.
Yes, hello, this is John Kleindens. I live at 836 Oak Street in Winston-Salem. I did not say that I wanted to speak in support of it, although I am in support of it. But I would just second all the things that Stimmel has said and has told me on the phone. It sounds like a very good neighbor for our condominium building.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, could you please give your zip code for the record?
I'm sorry, it's 27101.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kleindens. Mr. Murphy, still about 8 minutes left, I presume?
Yes, sir, 8:15.
All right, anyone else like to speak in support?
My name is Martha Meyer, and I would like to.
All right, Ms. Meyer, if you could please give your address and your zip code.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. My address is 836 Oak Street, and my zip code is 27101.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer.
I do think that this is a good use for this property. My concern with the zoning request is that no site plan seems to be required to do it. And I think it would be helpful if we could see a site plan before it's approved by City Council. And I also am concerned about the street and the city. We have some people actually living on Oak Street out of their vehicles, and I'm concerned about that. And I don't know if it's a matter for social services or someone to help these people who are basically homeless, unless you consider their vehicles a home.
Mr. King, can that be reported to the proper back?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and it will certainly show up in the minutes that go forward to City Council.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But it does seem like a good use. I just think we need to see a site plan before it's rubber stamped.
So noted.
And that's it. That's all I have.
Probably a little over 7 minutes left. So is there anyone else like to speak in support? Mr. King, do you see?
Mr. Chairman, I do not see anybody else who has signed up in support of the request. I do have one person who has signed up in opposition. It looks like Lou Carrico, if you're ready to move to the opponents.
I am. Mr. Carrico, if you would state your name, address, and zip code for the record, please, and state your opposition.
Yes, my name is Lou Carrico. I work at the Winston-Salem Rescue Commission. I'm the interim executive director there. We're at 718 North Trade Street, 27101. I can appreciate Dakota just saying that this is his first opportunity as far as a rezoning a case, a presentation. This is my first time doing this as well. And I really wanted to listen in on exactly, what this was going to be about today and how it might or might not affect the rescue mission and our location there. I'm definitely not an opponent. Now that I've listened in on this conversation today, I would say that we are a proponent. We want to have a good relationship with our neighbors. We do have some concerns as far as the E district and what we're trying to do at the Rescue Commission, you know, with our men in recovery. We're doing very well, but we realize that's just the nature of being downtown. But as far as the PB district and being that buffer on that area, definitely is a good thing. I do appreciate Martha's request for the site plan. I think that would be very, very helpful. But again, I just wanted to at least reserve the right to be an opponent if anything had come up that I thought might have adversely affected the Rescue Commission where it's at. But I'm not hearing that. And again, I just wanted to, and that's the only reason why I came in as an opponent, because I really wasn't sure. But I would definitely retract that, and we would be a proponent. We definitely don't want to hinder any beautification of our area and, you know, things that are good like that PB district.
Mr. Carrico, thank you for your comments, and also thank you for the work that the Winston-Salem Rescue Mission does in our community.
Thank you, sir. Praise the Lord. Thank you.
Amen.
Mr. King, is there any other now opposition at all? You're muted, sir.
Apologies. No, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So seeing no one, I'm going to declare the public hearing closed. Board, what is your disposition on this case?
Mr. Chairman, I'd move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second, Mr. Bryan.
Second by Mr. Bryan. Thank you. Any discussion?
I would like to ask one final question, please.
Yes, sir.
Of Luke and the staff. The proposed zoning list of permitted uses, in my reading, includes far more uses than are at all needed for what's being discussed today. I'd just like to ask for some input on that. For example, we'll be permitting a funeral home, a postal processing facility, and others that just don't seem overly compatible. So maybe I'm missing something.
Luke, if you want to go ahead and answer that, then I can also offer comments as well.
Sure, Steelman, good question. You know, and when it comes to the zonings, and in this case, it's a limited use zoning. So when we have a developer that's looking at a site, and you're also looking at what the property owners are, when you're rezoning that, we like to include as many possible uses as we can, just in case the proposed project does not work out. But obviously the intent is to move forward with what we stated in the hearing today with the multifamily. But this keeps the flexibility again open from a zoning standpoint, and that is supported by the area plan as well with that type of zoning request.
Thanks, Luke.
And Jack, this is Aaron. I'll just also mention, we always encourage applicants to, even if they do have one use, if there's still other appropriate uses, to consider those as well. If a deal falls through and this goes away, perhaps there's appropriate zoning in place if somebody else comes along, as long as the land uses make sense. So that's why you probably see a few more uses on here than what is kind of probably specifically envisioned. We didn't see any that were particularly out of character with the area. So that's why you might see a little longer list than just what's the intended use.
Thank you.
There's a previous motion on the floor and second. Any further discussion? If not, Mr. King, could you please call the roll?
Yes. George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Johnny Seegers.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Last item on the is the text amendment, case 9.
Mr. Chairman, we're going to need a motion on the case recommendation itself.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence, and I move that the planning board recommend approval of W3441.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, seconded by
Mr. Grubbs.
Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, again, please call the roll.
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Johnny Seegers,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay, case W3441 is recommended for approval unanimously. And it looks like we'll move on to item B7. Case W3442 will be our next public hearing.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, again, it is case W3442. Zignet Management LLC is the petitioner. Site is 7.5 acres located on the west side of Everett Road across from True Love Lane. It is a special use rezoning from RS9 single family residential to RM5, where the maximum density is 5 units per acre for the uses of residential buildings, single family, twin home, duplex, and townhome. This is Legacy's growth management plan. It's located within the yellow suburban neighborhoods growth management area 3. And this is a zoning map showing the subject property there. Again, it's on the west side of Everett Road. The site is currently undeveloped. It's located in the midst of other RS9 zonings and single family homes. And this is an aerial photo showing the subject property, which is undeveloped. You can see the surrounding development pattern. And a couple of images on site. This is looking south on Everett Road, which is actually a major thoroughfare, which has ample capacity. The site is to the right, and you have True Love right there to the left, and that's opposite where the connection to this would go if approved. This is looking eastward into True Love Lane across the street from the subject property. And looking north on Everett, the site would be to the left. It's located within the Southwest Suburban Area Plan update adopted in 2015, which recommends single family residential up to 8 units per acre, which this is actually attached homes, duplex or twin home units, but it is well under 8 units per acre. Just looking at that, you can see Everett Road again is the major connector road through this area. And so the site has one access onto Everett. It's kind of a self-enclosed site. As you can see, it is surrounded by single family homes that back up to this, but it's not located in the midst of them. Next image. So this is a site plan. It's 36 townhouse units. It's about 4.8 units per acre. So actually the density is just comparable to what you could expect under the current RS9 zoning. As Desmond Corley mentioned earlier, sidewalks are proposed on both sides of the street there. They have in excess of the common recreation area that they're proposed that are required. And they're also showing a 15-foot, I believe, a 20-foot type 2 buffer yard surrounding the perimeter. So that's something that would not be installed under a conventional RS9 development, is that buffer yard that you can see around the perimeter. No sidewalk is proposed along Everett. That's the long-term plans for sidewalk installation. But so instead they are doing a payment in lieu. Next image. And these are the building elevations, which again, as Desmond mentioned, are really comparable in regard to massing and height to the surrounding single family homes. The proposed density at 4.8 units per acre is very comparable to the density permitted under the current RS9 zoning, which essentially is the same, 4.8 units per acre. So we're not talking about a high density development. And also with this type of product, the traffic count is actually lower than is anticipated with detached single family homes. So it's actually would generate less traffic than a conventional RS9 subdivision would. It's consistent with Legacy, our long-range plan that recommends a variety of housing choices in the area with a context-sensitive design, which again, we feel like this is kind of a self-enclosed development, really an inwardly focused development, and and less impactful to the surrounding homes. The scale of the proposed units, again, is comparable to the nearby single-family homes, and Everett Road is a major thoroughfare with ample capacity. So staff does recommend approval, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I had a question, Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
On the site plan, it shows an emergency access road that looks like it's partially shared a driveway with a single-family home. And just wanted to know if there was any possibility for that to be opened up as a secondary access, or if there, you know, if there was any prohibition against using that as a secondary access.
This is Aaron. Can you go back to the site plan, Amy?
I'm looking to see if, so you're talking about, well, you can't see my pointer, but it's in the northern top image of the screen there from that cul-de-sac. Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
So I'm looking to see if there is a gate on that or a condition for a gate.
Melinda, this is Aaron. Let me answer it this way. This is a special use site plan, and it locks them into exactly what is shown on this site plan. So it will have to be an emergency only access road. Should anyone want to change the condition of that road, that would trigger a site plan amendment.
Right. Okay.
And also, I'm sorry. And also, if I could just jump in, there is a house located to the west of the northernmost cul-de-sac that can be accessed via that driveway, but they actually have a driveway into the subdivision off of Brook Hill Drive. So they can use this driveway that goes out to Everett, but they actually have a formal driveway that goes and ties into the cul-de-sac on Brook Hill Drive. The piece of property on the corner of that emergency access road at Everett, that's a Bell South like switching station, or whatever they do with that type of stuff. That's not a home.
Oh, I see. I didn't see that, but you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Apologize, I muted myself. All right, Aaron, I think, is there opposition to this case?
So Mr. Chairman, if there's no more questions from the board and you're ready to move into the public hearing, we'll start with the proponents. And it looks like we have 3 individuals who are in the meeting as proponents. The first person is signed up as a proponent. The only thing that shows up is Majid, and I don't have a last name. So if you can hear me and you would like to give comments to the board, please unmute yourself and provide your name and address for the record.
Hey, Chris?
Yes.
Steve Causey here. Do you mind if I go first?
Not at all.
Okay. The petitioners' representatives are present, and they may speak kind of as needed, but Steve Causey, Allied Design, 4720 Mill Road, Winston-Salem, 27103. So yeah, we prepared the site plan for the petitioner, obviously. We did have a neighborhood meeting, outreach meeting before COVID-19 on February the 5th. We had a couple of folks in attendance. One was an adjoiner and a lady across the road. More curiosity and interest than anything. I think you have the meeting summary in your agenda packets. Gary's hit all the highlights. Really, we felt like the density was consistent with the area plan. The twin home clustering arrangement allows us to deal with topography. We have about 50 feet of fall across the site from one end to the other. So it did allow us to kind of, densify things more internally. I think Gary pointed out the buffer yards around the perimeter would not be required with single family development. We did agree to a little extra sidewalk. We actually have sidewalks along both sides of the streets at staff's request. The developer has agreed to that. And I think you referenced the sidewalk along Everett. We would be making a payment in lieu of for that sidewalk, that it's not practical to construct at this time. So that's kind of really all I wanted to add. Again, the petitioner's here. If you do want to hear anything from him, Mike or Majid, you guys chime in as needed, but I think that covers things from our end.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Would either of the other two like to speak?
No, it's Majid. I don't have anything to add. I think Steve made it very clear that is, I think it's very compatible with the area and should not add any traffic, and everything should be, and make that area in better shape anyway.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, Majid, since you spoke, could you please give your name and address and zip code for the record?
Yeah, Majid Mirzazadeh, and address is 842 Wind Allier Lane, 27106.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy, how much time is left for proponent?
Oh, slightly over 10 minutes.
Right. Would anyone else like to speak in support?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see anybody else in a meeting that is here in support of this case.
All right, so we can move to opposition.
Mr. Chairman, we have one person who has signed up to speak in opposition. It is Fred Marlowe. Fred, if you are still with us, please unmute yourself and provide your name and address for the record.
Yes, it's Fred Marlowe, 3216 Lauren Fields Way, 27107. We're within the 500-foot area of the proposed site. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The main thing that we're concerned with as residents here is we're in a fairly modest subdivision here at Ashton Grove, which is right off the top of the first drawing there off Pope Road. And the homes, are pretty similar. There are single family homes on I think the square footage on the lot has to be about 9,000 square feet or so. We just would like to see if we're going to have additional growth in the area, which we have had a lot around the Salisbury Road area on the way to the Walmart that was talked about earlier on Peters Creek. And all those pockets of homes all seem to have single family dwellings. This fact that these are duplexes is of a concern that we have, that is just not going to look as good as the other homes that we have around that are a very strong HOA here at Ashton Grove, very enforceable in terms of keeping your house clean, your yard tidied up, and those kinds of things. And we're just concerned to make the multiple family home change. It's just not consistent with what we've seen around. Obviously, a lot of planning gone into this. I can understand that. We can obviously understand undeveloped areas need to be developed, and we welcome that as well. I know that you guys have done a lot of due diligence, but if you look back at something you talked about earlier, and you talked about something that was incompatibility when something that was designed was backed up against single family homes, things like what we have here. And that's the only thing I would like to go on the record as saying. One other thing is that we didn't get information about the meeting. We would have certainly been there. And then we did get this in the mail recently, and that's the only reason I've been on the call here with you for a couple hours. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Marlowe. Would anyone else like to speak in opposition, or does anyone have any questions for Mr. Marlowe? All right. So seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed. Planning board, what is your motion on this?
This is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second, Johnny Seegers.
Second by Mr. Seegers. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
Yes. George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Mr. Hicks, you're on mute. Mr. Hicks, you're on mute.
He's having trouble getting off mute, I think.
Mr. Hicks. Mr. King.
Mr. Chair, we can come back. We can go down the roll and come back to Mr. Hicks if you'd like.
Yes.
Okay. Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Lee.
Yes.
Johnny Seegers.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Apologies, I had no visual for a moment, but my vote is yes.
Thank you.
So we'll now need a vote on.
Okay, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W at 3442, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. That's the motion by Mr. Lamb. Seconded.
Second, Mr.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bryan. Any discussion? Mr. King, will you please call the roll?
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Lee.
Yes.
Johnny Seegers.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Case W3442 will go forward to City Council with a recommendation for approval. And that brings us to our last item on the agenda, which is item B9, and that is a UDO text amendment that Amy is going to pull that up, and Chris Murphy is going to run through this very briefly for the board.
How much are you stressing brief? It's just a joke. This is a UDO CC2. This would be the second text amendment that we will have since we have gone to UDO clear code. This is a staff-initiated amendment to clarify special use permit requirements for uses that have been approved through the special use district rezoning process. This item was not briefed to you because we haven't had a briefing session since we've started this text amendment. Normally, we wouldn't come to you without going to a briefing, but this truly is just an administrative clarification of our practices over the probably the last 30 plus years. After we were discussing this with the city attorney's office, so we felt like it was okay to bring this forward. This is needed to clarify existing practices. The enabling legislation for Winston-Salem and Forsyth County allows legislative approval of special use zoning and associated special use permits. And as part of that, it doesn't require a separate special use permit if special use district zoning is approved. I'll just go into a little bit of a detail on in the existing ordinance. There are two provisions that deal with Board of Adjustment special use permits and elected body special use permits, A's and E's in the table of permitted uses. And both of those sections exist and existed in the current UDO, exist in the previous UDO, and existed in the zoning ordinance. And both of those sections state that no separate special use permit would be necessary for items listed in the table of permitted uses as A and E if they had been approved through a special use or a limited use rezoning. Just to make it crystal clear, after some discussions with the attorney's office, we wanted to place additional references to these two sections that I just cited, 3-2, 13A and B, and 5-1.5A, 3 and 4, that clarify again that no separate special use permit would be required for anything that's an A and an E in the table of permitted uses if there has been a separate special use and limited use rezoning. So with that, I think we can go to the last slide, and that kind of goes into what I was just talking about. I'm not sure if there's a slide after that, but staff is recommending approval. Again, this doesn't change any current policy or practice. It's just providing additional clarification into the ordinance. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Chris.
Yes.
On behalf of the goals of Clear Code, will there be links available for each of the exceptions so
Yes.
a user can just jump back and forth?
Yes.
Gosh,
There are,
thank you.
the information that was sent to you and you're reviewing online, you keep in mind, is not the UDO. So if you click on anything there that shows as a link, it's not actually linked because it's just a document. But in the actual Clear Code, all those hyperlinks will work.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'll turn it back over to the chair. And again, I don't hear, if there are any more questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I did seek clarification, and we will need both a consistency vote and a vote on the actual text amendment. I did confirm that with the Deputy City Attorney Contos. So we will need 2 votes on this when the time comes.
All right. Thank you. Any other discussion on this? All right. If not, would anyone like to make a motion on the consistency piece?
Mr. Chairman, let me jump in real quick. There's nobody here for this, but you'll want to go ahead and formally close that public hearing.
I declare the public hearing closed.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I'd like to make the first motion that is consistent with something. I can't remember what, but
with legacy.
Okay, with legacy.
It's been a motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Stillman. Any discussion? Mr. King, you please call the roll.
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Johnny Seegers.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence again. I move that the planning board recommend approval of UDO CC2.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. King, you call the roll, please.
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Tommy Hicks.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Johnny Seegers.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay, UDO CC2 will go forward to the elected officials with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you very much. We will now move into our staff report. Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This concludes a long meeting. It's been a while since we've all been together. I'll just share a couple notes. Having gotten to this point, I feel like the meeting for our first attempt at this has gone pretty well, other than a couple little ticky-tack technical issues here and there. I think overall it went well. I really want to thank our staff. We have put a lot of time and effort into this in trying to get a format that we believe is adequate and suitable for not only the board, but staff and our guests that have joined us today. And I will tell you, I believe this meeting has gone as well as any of the meetings I've observed or participated in, especially when we had an agenda with 12 items on it. And when we had 54 participants in this Zoom call at the start of the meeting, that's a pretty heavy learning curve for the first one of these. So all in all, I'm very proud of our staff, and especially Brian Wilson, who is still on the call. We all had to learn this from scratch, and Brian was really embraced the role of kind of, I know enough on Zoom to be dangerous. Brian really stepped up and really mastered this and was really the glue that kind of made all this happen. So I want to recognize Brian for all of his efforts there, and the rest of the staff as well. Like I said, we put in a lot of work to get to this point. And so I'll just say that. Kirk, I see your hands raised. Did you have something?
I was just clapping in agreement for what you said about Mr. Wilson.
Gotcha. Sorry.
I just want to say thanks to the board, and I'm equally as dangerous with this thing. So thanks for your patience, Aaron.
I was watching it on YouTube as well, and that went well and very skilled as well.
So I'll say this. Well, sorry, Clarence, go ahead.
No, just good job. Congratulations. That's smoothest Zoom meeting I've been in so far.
Well, what I would say to the board is this. Please, if you have any comments about what worked or what didn't work or things we need to keep in mind to improve for the next one, please send those to me. We obviously want to take some feedback and improve moving forward. So if you do have any thoughts, please share those with me so we can take those as staff and continue to improve this process. So
candied pecans.
What's that?
Candied pecans.
Make sure to get some over to you. I'll recognize Desmond very quickly for a preview of your June 11th public hearing meeting.
All right, so the June meeting is going to be much shorter than the May meeting. This one will be in 2 weeks on June 11th. There are 4 rezoning petitions. 2 of them are limited use cases and 2 of them are general use cases, so no site plans, no special use site plans. And then we have 2 subdivisions for you all to review. And that's it.
Good. Thank you, Desmond. So planning board, looking ahead, your June 11th meeting, we are going to do that virtually as well. We're not going to be in a place to meet in person. So that will be the same format as what we did this afternoon. After that, your June 25th work session, we will probably do that one virtually as well. We'll do that one through Zoom. We've got some items we do need to bring to you there, including sort of a preview of your next year's work program. So we've got some things we need to bring to you. We're going to do that one with you virtually. And then as we start to get into July 9th is your next public hearing meeting. We're starting to get a little further out. I've been in close contact with the chairman as far as when the board would like to meet in person. July 9th is your meeting date. We have to send letters and advertise well in advance of that. So probably we need to, I'll be working with the chair to kind of get some feel from the board as to whether or not you want to try to have that in person or whether you would like to do that virtually. We can accommodate you either way, but we probably need to kind of pin that down by, I would say, about June 20th. So we've got some time. But again, I'll be in close contact with the chair to continue making that decision. Again, we're glad to accommodate the board however you'd like to go at that point. I will mention sign check as well. We are not in a position to do sign check, obviously, and we will need to suspend sign check indefinitely for obvious reasons. It's not a good idea in light of COVID-19 to have a group of people in a confined space for an hour or 2 at a time. So for the foreseeable future, we will suspend sign check. What we will do is kind of what we did this go around, where Desmond will compile kind of the slideshow that has location maps, aerial photos, site plans, and the images that staff takes when we visit the site to get to check to see if the signs are there. We will continue sending the board that so that if you do want to study up and get familiar with the sites, you'll have as much information as we can get you in a safe manner. And I think the only other thing I would mention is, man, we've been trying to get perfect attendance for a while. Who knew all it took was a virtual meeting? So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a screenshot of this, and maybe that can be the picture of the board that we post on the website. So just kidding. We're not going to do that, but it's good to see everybody again. I'm glad to see everybody's doing well. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I do not have any further comments.
All right. Any planning board member have any other comments?
One question from Clarence. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I said I saw your hand.
Oh, okay. How did the public have an opportunity to figure out how to show up for this meeting?
Yeah, good question, Clarence. So we spent a lot of time thinking about that. So the first thing we did is obviously we send letters to the applicants and every property owner within 500 feet. That's your green ring on your maps. So we went in and modified that letter to fit this meeting. And so we said, you know, what is traditionally in the letter, if you have questions, here's the staff member and their contact information. The meeting will be held virtually. And if you would like to participate virtually, we included the link in there that would take you to our homepage where the meeting invite information was posted. We provided the phone number for folks who did not have internet ability to participate in the meeting. We also set up a dedicated phone line so that anyone who wanted to just call in and leave comments on any of the cases could do so. We got one of those that I believe we forwarded to you as well. And then once, and so again, so you can send emails and all the traditional forms there. And then once I think it was Monday or actually Friday of last week, we updated our homepage. The first thing you came across in bright, bold colors was meeting information. And it included the link to the meeting. It included the phone number to participate, the dedicated voicemail, the YouTube link. So if anybody wanted to watch at home, they were able to. And so we tried to cast as wide of a net as possible to let folks know how they could get involved with this process.
Good job.
I move the staff be relieved of their duties for the remainder of the evening.
Second.
All right. Thank you again, Aaron. I think you'll get some rest tonight because I know you've had some restless nights in anticipation of this meeting. So to you and the staff, job well done.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
For the good of the order.
Hey, I have one more thing, the motion to adjourn.
Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you all.
Good job, Chairman.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
If you're still with us, we can